The Conman Who Played My Heart, a story of survival and truth. Reddit stories. Back then, I didn't believe in fate or signs from the universe. I believed in effort, logic, and the idea that love was built, not found. My friends would laugh when I told them my checklist, the one I quietly kept in my head. He had to be kind, ambitious but not obsessed, someone who respected silence as much as conversation, someone who wouldn't flinch at the thought of commitment. And most of all, he had to be safe. Safe in the way a harbor is safe during a storm. Not thrilling, not dramatic, just safe. Then came Daniel. He didn't arrive like a storm. He came quietly, like a shift in the wind. You don't notice it at first. It's just a breeze brushing against your cheek. You think, oh, that's nice. Then suddenly the whole sky is different. The waves change direction. That was him. We met in an airport of all places. I was stuck overnight due to a canceled flight, pacing the empty terminal like a ghost when I saw him reading a book, actual pages, not a tablet. That already felt rare. I made some sarcastic comment about how airports are the best places to finish Dostoevsky. He smiled without looking up. Only if you're heartbroken or stranded, he said. We were both. He had just ended a 4-year relationship. I was running from a wedding that wasn't mine but should have been. His calm fascinated me. He wasn't trying to impress, wasn't performing grief or masculinity, he just was. And in that quiet I found an anchor. The night blurred into morning. We sat on cold benches, traded stories, talked about everything and nothing. I remember the way he looked at me. Not like I was a puzzle to solve, but like I already made sense. That's what pulled me in. That, and the fact that when I cried unexpectedly talking about my sister's death, he didn't lean in or back away. He just sat with me in the H, like someone who knew what it meant to lose and survive. We exchanged numbers before boarding. I didn't think anything would come of it. He lived 3 cities away, but he texted before my plane took off. You made my delay unforgettable. That was the start. What followed felt like a movie montage. He visited the next weekend. Then again. Then I went to him. He started sleeping at my place more than his own. Everything about him was effortless, like he already belonged. He remembered my coffee order without asking. He met my mother and actually listened when she went on tangents about astrology. He laughed at my terrible jokes like they were stand-up gold. My friends adored him. They said I seemed lighter, less guarded. I was. I'd spent years in relationships where I had to explain myself, defend my choices, shrink a little to fit their expectations. With Daniel, I expanded. And that's where I started to ignore the little things, like how he never let me touch his phone, always turning it face down, or how he had sudden meetings pop up that he could never explain in detail, or the way his mood would shift if someone asked too many questions about his past. But I chalked it up to boundaries. We all have ghosts. Some of us just keep them quieter. We moved in together after 7 months. Too fast, my best friend warned. But it felt right. We split rent, groceries, even Spotify. Domestic bliss. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and newspaper crosswords. Friday nights, we cooked together, danced to old vinyls he insisted sounded warmer than digital. I remember one night we sat on the couch, wine half finished, my head on his shoulder, when he looked at me and said, I never thought I could be this happy. I believed him. I needed to. Until the postcard came. It was a simple envelope, no return address, just our address handwritten. Inside, a picture of the Eiffel Tower and one line, does he still lie about Paris? My stomach dropped. Paris was a sore subject with him. He claimed he'd never been. Said it reminded him of someone he lost, wouldn't elaborate. I'd never pushed. But this was personal, deliberate. I showed it to him, he barely blinked. Just smiled and said, some people enjoy messing with others. Probably an ex. Forget it, but I couldn't. That night, when he was asleep, I opened his laptop. Password was still the same, my birthday. Navi maybe, but it felt like trust. There were no emails, no open tabs. Just one folder labeled tax. I clicked it, empty, except for one subfolder hidden in the metadata. And inside, dozens of scanned IDs, Different names, same face. His British, Belgian, American. Some photos had him with a beard, others clean shaven. Different hair, different eyes with colored lenses. All him. My heart pounded so loud I was afraid it would wake him. I copied them to a flash drive I'd once used for college essays. And then I sat there, staring at the screen, wondering who the hell was sleeping next to me. The next morning, I didn't confront him. I kissed him goodbye, told him I was running errands. And I ran, straight to the only person I trusted more than myself. My godmother, a retired detective. She didn't even blink, said she'd look into it discreetly. 2 days later, she called. He's wanted in 3 countries, she said. Real name unknown. But the Paris story. He was there. The woman he lost was a target. She didn't survive. My knees gave out. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the phone like it could stop my world from spinning. When I got back home, he was waiting. Flowers. My favorite. But his eyes, those eyes I thought knew sorrow, they were watching me. Not in love. In calculation. Like he already knew what I'd done. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed dressed, shoes on, phone in hand. He didn't ask. He just held me tighter in bed, whispering how much he loved me, how lucky he felt. I tried not to shiver. The next morning the doorbell rang. I nearly cried with relief when I saw the uniforms. But Daniel didn't flinch. He smiled, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Whatever happens, remember I really did love you." Then he turned himself in like a man returning a library book. Calm. Polite. That was the last time I saw him. For weeks after, I kept expecting to wake up from it. Like I'd find him in the kitchen again, barefoot, making eggs, asking me which mug I wanted. But reality doesn't give you closure. It gives you silence. He never called. Never wrote. The flash drive was seized as evidence. The postcard, they traced it to a woman he'd scammed 5 years ago. She never got justice, just the satisfaction of warning the next one. Me, I learned later that Daniel, or whatever his name was, had multiple lives, multiple women. One of them died. Several went bankrupt. I got lucky. I got out. But even now, sometimes I dream of that airport, of our first night, of that version of him that felt real. Maybe he loved me in his way. Maybe he didn't. But I know this much: he was never mine. Not really. And maybe, just maybe, I was never his either. I was just the next chapter in a story he never planned to finish. The news moved fast once the arrest made headlines, not under his real name, because no one really knew it, but under one of the many aliases they'd finally confirmed through Interpol. International Conman captured in quiet suburb. The article said, as if my life was a setting, not a consequence. Neighbors stared when I went to the grocery store. Some were curious, others sympathetic. One woman, an older neighbor I barely knew, dropped off a pie with a note, "You didn't deserve this." I didn't. But I also didn't know what I had deserved, and that was worse. The questions came faster than the answers. Who was he really? How much of our life together had been a performance? Was anything real? The cops interrogated me more than once. Did you know he was using aliases? Did he ever mention offshore accounts? Did you travel with him outside the country? I could see it in their eyes. Doubt. Like I was too close not to be complicit. I showed them the flash drive, the postcard, told them about the fake documents, the meetings he wouldn't explain, the way he kept his phone locked like a vault. One detective took pity on me, I think. He said, "Men like him aren't just good at lying. They're good at being who you need, until they don't need you anymore." That sat in my chest like lead. I couldn't stay in that apartment. Every corner echoed with his voice. The way he used to sing badly in the shower, the smell of his aftershave on the couch cushions, the drawer full of his socks I hadn't been able to throw out yet. I moved out 2 weeks after the arrest, packed my things into boxes that felt heavier than they should have. My best friend, Claire, helped me. She never said "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She just hugged me when I started crying over a bent photo frame and said, "Let it out. You've earned it." I didn't even realize how much I had bottled up, not just the betrayal, but the grief. I was mourning someone who never really existed. After I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, I tried to rebuild some semblance of normal. I got a new phone number, blocked his old one, even though it had never rung again. I changed my email, wiped my socials, told only a handful of people where I'd gone. I didn't trust anyone fully, not even myself. Therapy helped. At first, I didn't even know what to say to the counselor. I just sat there, frozen, a statue in a chair. But over time, the words came. I feel stupid. I feel violated. I don't know if I'll ever trust love again. And the hardest one to admit, I miss him. Not the criminal, not the liar, but the man who made pancakes on Sundays. The one who knew my bad days before I said a word. That's the thing no one tells you about deception. Grief still shows up, even when the person was never who you thought. And worse, you start doubting every instinct. If I was wrong about him, could I be wrong about everyone? Months passed. Daniel's trial began in late spring. I didn't attend, I couldn't. But I read about it. Court documents described years of fraud, impersonation, wire transfers, identity theft. A web of lies so complex it spanned 3 continents. He'd posed as a consultant, a diplomat, a tech investor. He had lovers in Milan, Zurich, Sao Paulo. The woman in Paris. They never released her name, only said she had succumbed during a targeted scam gone wrong. They hinted at foul play but never charged him with murder. Just fraud. Grand larceny. Forgery. He pled not guilty to everything. But evidence was overwhelming. Testimonies from former victims painted him as charismatic, brilliant, cold. Some said he cried when he confessed. Others said he vanished without warning, leaving only debt behind. One said he proposed with a fake diamond ring he later pawned. Each story sounded familiar. Too familiar. I kept thinking about the night I found the folder on his laptop. What if I hadn't looked? What if I had just married him? We were close. He'd brought it up more than once. I used to think he was waiting for the right moment. Now I knew he was probably waiting for the right exit. But why didn't he run? Why didn't he disappear like he had with the others? I kept turning it over like a stone in my mind. The only answer that made sense terrified me. Maybe he wanted to be caught. Maybe I was the last mask he couldn't wear anymore. Or maybe I meant something different. Not more, not less, just different. 6 months after his arrest, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was familiar. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity is louder than caution. It was short. Just 1 page. You were the only one I didn't want to lie to, it said. Said doesn't make it better. I know that. But I need you to know that when I said I loved you, it wasn't part of the con. It was the only thing that felt real. I hope you find peace. D. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded the letter carefully and locked it in a drawer I never opened again. Because it wasn't closure. It was another performance. Or maybe it was honest. That's the worst part. I'll never know. Life didn't return to what it was before. How could it? I started over in small ways. I cut my hair. Started taking long walks without music, just listening to the world. I deleted every photo of us except one, taken in the airport that first night. I kept it not for him, but for her. The version of me who still believed in serendipity. She deserved to be remembered. Because she wasn't stupid. She was hopeful. There's a difference. Slowly, I began seeing people again. A coffee here, a drink there. But I was different, more cautious. I noticed everything. Body language, pauses in stories, inconsistent details. The moment someone looked too perfect, I recoiled. That's what he took from Med, the luxury of ne veta. Then came Julian, a colleague from a freelance project. Quiet, unassuming. The kind of man who didn't try to charm. He just showed up. He didn't make grand gestures. He made space. One night, after a long meeting, we found ourselves alone in a parking lot. He looked at me and said, "You flinch when someone gets close. Did someone hurt you?" I didn't answer. He didn't push, just nodded. "I'll wait," he said. And he did. Over weeks, he didn't try to fix me. He just listened. And when I finally told him everything, he didn't look at me like I was broken. He just said, That must have been hell. I'm sorry you went through that. No judgment, no rescue. Just felt safe. Not the thrilling, intoxicating kind, but the harbor, the one I thought I'd lost forever. Still, every now and then, I'd wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, convinced I'd seen Daniel's face in a crowd. My therapist called it trauma imprinting, like my body remembered danger before my mind could. So I'd sit up, breathe, and remind myself he's behind bars. You are not that woman anymore. You survived. It took nearly a year before I could look in the mirror and see myself without him in the reflection. Not his influence, not his ghost, just me. Stronger, wiser. Not cynical, but cautious. There's a difference. And eventually, I let Julian hold my hand in public. Eventually, I introduced him to my mother. Eventually, I let him stay the night without checking his phone screen when he fell asleep. But I also set rules for myself. Boundaries I wouldn't compromise. Questions I'd ask early. Things I'd never ignore again, because love shouldn't be a gamble. And trust. Trust should be earned, not assumed. And still, on quiet days, when the world feels soft, I remember Daniel. Not with longing, not with hatred. Just with the complicated tenderness you feel for a ghost you once mistook for home. Because sometimes, the worst betrayal doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from the person who made you believe in safety, then turned it into a weapon. And surviving that doesn't just change you, it rebuilds you, piece by piece, layer by layer. And in the end, maybe that's the real miracle. Not that you loved, but that you still can. What no one tells you is that rebuilding a life doesn't begin with some dramatic realization or a sunrise epiphany. It starts in the smallest, quietest ways. You throw out his old hoodie you used to sleep in. You stop instinctively checking the front door twice because you no longer expect someone on the other side. You walk through a grocery store and buy 1 carton of eggs instead of 2. That's where I was, in the details. Learning to live alone again, but more than that, learning to live with the version of myself who had been betrayed and didn't break. I'd stopped searching for closure and started looking for continuity. Something I could shape with my own hands, something real. That's when I got the idea to write about it. Not him. Not directly. Not the crimes or the lies or the name he wore like a coat. But the after, the way the heart reassembles. The way truth becomes both a weapon and a compass. I called it The Broken Mirror Doesn't Lie. It was a collection of essays, though I didn't call it that at first. I just wrote, pages at a time. Early mornings before the city woke up, late nights with tea gone cold beside me, words poured out like water from a crack in a dam. I didn't share them, not for a long time. But writing became the only place where I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like an observer of my own story. And there's power in that. Then something strange happened. One night, I received a message through a private forum for women who'd been deceived by Conman. I joined anonymously months earlier just to read, to see if anyone else felt the way I did. Ashamed, angry, confused, hollow, I never posted, just lurked in the shadows of other people's pain. But that night, a woman messaged me directly. Her name was Lydia. She said she had read my post about Paris, which I never made public. The details she mentioned, they were too precise. I froze. He used the same name with me, she wrote. Same story, same smile. But I didn't believe him. You did. There was no venom in her words, just a kind of resigned sadness, as if she had watched a fire she knew would burn, unable to stop the one who stepped into it. We talked for hours that night, exchanged photos, compared notes. It was like dissecting a dream with someone who had been there too, only from a different angle. She said he'd contacted her just days before meeting me. She had blocked him. Something about his eyes had unsettled her. Not the eyes themselves, she said. The way they didn't match his smile. Lydia became a lifeline, not because we shared a trauma, but because she reminded me that I wasn't crazy. She had seen the same patterns, the same tactics, the charm, the slow erosion of logic. One night she said, "We weren't stupid. We were chosen." That stuck with me, because it reframed everything. He didn't just find women, he studied them. Knew how to become what each of us needed. I needed kindness, stability, soft hands and silence that listened. And that's what he gave me until it was time to take. Lydia needed admiration. He gave her praise and grand gestures. But he left before the con ran too deep. He knew she'd see through it eventually. She did. I didn't. And that difference haunted me more than the lies. Because it meant I'd been more blind, more open. But maybe also more loving. And that wasn't a flaw. It was a risk I took in good faith. A year passed. The world had moved on. News outlets stopped talking about the trial. People stopped whispering in coffee shops. Even my friends began asking if I was seeing anyone new. I hated the question. As if healing was measured by how quickly you let someone else in. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt invincible. Other days I flinched at the sound of his name on television. Someone else named Daniel, not even him. But it was enough. Trauma doesn't fade evenly. It hides in corners, waits, and when it surfaces, you breathe through it. Again and again, until it becomes a memory instead of a wound. I eventually submitted my manuscript to a small, independent press. No expectations. I didn't even use my full name. Just initials. It wasn't about fame. It was about release. Letting go in the most permanent way I knew how, by turning pain into paper. They called a month later. Said the book resonated. Said they cried reading it. Said they wanted to publish. I nearly dropped the phone. Me? The girl who once loved a ghost. The girl who doubted her own reflection because a man built her reality on sand. That girl had written something worth sharing. I cried for hours. Not out of joy, out of relief, because finally something good had come out of it. Not revenge, not justice, just truth. The book launch was quiet. A bookstore reading with a handful of chairs and stale cookies in the corner. But it felt monumental. Lydia flew in. She sat in the front row, smiling like we shared a secret. Afterward, a woman approached me. She looked nervous, like she might cry. She said, "I didn't think anyone else knew what it was like. You said everything I couldn't." I hugged her. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. Her pain wore the same outfit mine once had. The book caught fire in small circles, podcasts, forums, quiet corners of the internet where women gathered like whispering shadows. They called it brave. I didn't feel brave. I just felt done. Done being silent. Done being a chapter in someone else's narrative. I was finally the author. Then came the letter. Again, no return address. The envelope looked nearly identical to the first one. My stomach churned. I almost burned it without reading. But curiosity, foolish, faithful curiosity, won again. Inside was a single page. The handwriting shakier this time, less composed. "I read your book," it said. "It's strange reading yourself through someone else's eyes. I don't deny it, any of it. You told the truth. But I want you to know something. I didn't run because I was caught. I stayed because for once I didn't want to run. That's all I'll say. D." There was no rage in me this time. Just a deep, sighing sadness, like the final exhale of something that's been held too long. I folded the letter, not like a relic, but like a receipt. Proof of something that once was. I didn't lock it in a drawer this time. I placed it in a donation box along with the last of the clothes he left behind. Let someone else find it, if they must. I was done carrying his voice in my house. Life began to feel lighter. Julian and I had parted ways, not out of hurt, but misalignment. He wanted a clean slate. I wanted space to live with my scars. We remained friends. Occasionally messaged about new music or random dreams. There was no bitterness, just understanding. And that, too, was healing. To know not all endings come from betrayal. I started speaking at shelters, at universities, at conferences on psychological abuse and identity fraud. Not because I wanted to be a spokesperson, but because too many people still ask the wrong questions. Why didn't you leave sooner? Why didn't you see it? How could you fall for someone like that? As if trauma is logic's cousin. As if lies come with warning labels. I told them love is not a crime. Being deceived isn't a flaw. Believing in someone, even the wrong person, doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the narrative shifted. I was no longer the girl who dated a conman. I was a writer, an advocate, a survivor, a woman who rebuilt herself without asking for permission. Then one rainy Tuesday, I returned to that airport. I hadn't planned it. My flight was delayed, and I wandered through the terminal out of boredom. And there it was, the bench, the one where it began. I sat, breathed, closed my eyes. The echo of his voice haunted nothing. The ghosts were gone, and in that silence I smiled, because I had come full circle, not back to where I started, but to where I chose me. And that, more than anything, was the twist no one saw coming. Not the lies, not the arrest, not the betrayal. The twist was that I survived. And I didn't just survive, I thrived. I used to think the phrase, moving on, meant forgetting. Wiping the slate clean, burying the memories, and stepping into something unblemished. But that's not how it works. Moving on is more like walking with a limp. You're still getting somewhere, but the pain reminds you of where you've been. And eventually, you stop resenting the limp. You understand it's part of your gait now. You learn to move with it instead of pretending it isn't there. The success of the book brought opportunities I hadn't planned for, invitations to speak, interviews, even a small documentary segment. The producers were careful, respectful. They didn't ask for his name or want to sensationalize the story. They focused on the aftermath, the rebuilding. They called it The Girl Who Stayed. I hated the title at first. It felt like an accusation. But as I watched the footage, I saw something I hadn't before, me, on camera, telling the story not with shame, but with clarity. There was no shaking in my voice, no hesitation in my gaze. Just facts, scars, perspective. It wasn't about what I endured. It was about what I became. After the documentary aired, my inbox filled with letters, not just from women, men too. One man said he hadn't spoken to his sister in years because he didn't believe her when she said her fiancé was manipulating her. Another wrote that he saw himself in Daniel, that he was in recovery now, trying to rebuild after a life of lying. He said my words were the first that made him feel like redemption might still be possible. I read each message with a strange mix of and awe. It was never my goal to inspire. I only wanted to make sense of the mess. But if my survival gave someone else permission to try, then maybe that was enough. It was around this time I met Claire again. Not my best friend, but a different Claire. Claire Adams, a therapist who ran a recovery program for survivors of emotional fraud. She'd read the book, reached out, and invited me to speak at one of her retreats. I almost said no. I didn't want to relive everything again. But something about her voice felt steady, assured, like she wasn't asking for my trauma. She was offering me a platform to transform it. The retreat was held in the mountains. Simple cabins, foggy mornings, bonfires at night. No cell service, just people and silence and stories. I remember arriving with my suitcase in one hand and a notebook in the other, thinking I'd just give a 1-hour talk and leave. But the moment I stepped in the main lodge and saw the circle of chairs and tear-streaked faces, I knew I'd be staying. These were women who had lost more than money or time. They'd lost pieces of themselves. Some had been in therapy for years. Others had never spoken about what happened, not even to their families. But there, in that circle, they were raw, honest, unapologetic. And for the first time since everything with Daniel ended, I felt like I wasn't explaining, I was understood. I talked about the shame spiral, the way it swallows you whole. How people on the outside ask why you didn't leave, but never ask why he made it so hard. I talked about the power of charm, the slow erosion of certainty, how love becomes a leash disguised as a lifeline. I told them about the postcard, the fake passports, the final letter. I told them about the version of me who stayed. Not because she was stupid, but because she believed in people the way some believe in prayer. And I told them how I forgave her, because she did the best she could with the story she had. When I finished, there was silence, not the uncomfortable kind, the sacred kind, the kind where truth lingers in the air like smoke. Then one woman stood, said nothing, just hugged me. Then another, and another. And in that chain of silent connection, I felt something unlock. Healing isn't a ladder. It's a mosaic. Tiny broken pieces, reshaped into something that holds light in new ways. After the retreat, Claire asked if I'd consider leading future ones. I laughed at first, said I wasn't qualified. I wasn't a therapist. She shook her head. You're something else. You're the after. The proof it's possible. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. That summer, I moved again. Not out of fear, not to run, just to grow. I found a place near the sea, a small, sunlit cottage with chip paint and wildflowers growing through the cracks in the fence. The kind of home that didn't apologize for being weathered. It felt right. I painted the walls, planted a garden, adopted a cat named Finch who hated everyone but me, and slowly I started writing again. Not about Daniel, about rebirth, about the quiet courage of surviving yourself. Then, one evening as I sat on the porch watching the sun sink into the water, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. It was his lawyer. I froze, the wind died. Even Finch lifted his head like he sensed it. The lawyer said Daniel, whose real name I now learned was Ezra Wren, was up for a parole hearing. It had been 3 years since the trial. He'd served most of his sentence under a plea deal, good behavior, cooperation with investigators. The lawyer said Ezra wanted to meet me, just once. He says it's not about forgiveness, just closure. I laughed, bitter and dry. Closure for him. The lawyer didn't push, just gave me the date and time, said I didn't have to decide now. But if I wanted it, the door was open. I hung up and sat in the dark. Hours passed. The ocean roared quietly in the distance. Finch curled at my feet, and I thought about that door. What it would mean to open it, what it would cost. I didn't sleep that night. I journaled. I wrote him letters I'd never send. I listed everything I wanted to say, then crossed out most of it. Anger didn't live in me the way it once had. There was space now, room for nuance, but also boundaries, lines I had redrawn in thick ink. I told no one except Lydia. She called me the next day and said only, "Whatever you choose, it's the right choice, because you chose it." And so, I chose. I went. The prison was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, the energy. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a silence that pressed against your chest. I was led into a visitation room, no glass. Just a metal table, 2 chairs, and then he walked in. Older, thinner, his hair had lost its perfect shape. His eyes, those eyes I once drowned in, were duller now, but he still smiled. That same soft, disarming smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. I didn't answer. I sat. He began to speak. Slowly, measured, he talked about therapy, about how, for the first time, he wasn't trying to be anyone, how prison stripped him of performance. "In here," he said, "you're not a conman, you're just a man." I watched him, listened. But I kept my heart behind glass. Then he said something that shook me. "You weren't just my last stop. You were the first person I ever wanted to stay for. But I didn't know how. I still don't." Silence. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A sketch. It was me, not from memory. No romanticized beauty. It was me at the trial. Eyes hard. Face unreadable. A stranger. I needed to remember what I cost. I stood, took the paper, not to keep, just to understand. Then I said, "You didn't break me. You revealed me." And I left. No goodbye. No closure. Just choice. And this time it was mine. When I walked out of that prison, the air felt different. It wasn't cleaner or warmer or more free. Those would be easy metaphors. It was just real. Tangible. As if for the first time in years I wasn't performing resilience but embodying it. I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't let the sketch follow me home either. I left it on the visitation table. A piece of his narrative I refused to carry, because I had told him the truth. He hadn't broken me. He'd revealed the fractures I already had, the vulnerabilities I never wanted to admit. But he didn't get to claim my healing. That belonged to me. Back at the cottage, the wind had kicked up. My garden trembled under the salty air. and Finch stared out the window like he was guarding the perimeter. I made tea. Not because I needed it, but because rituals had become anchors. I curled up on the porch in my blanket, let the cat settle on my lap, and watched the sea claw at the horizon like it was trying to forget something too. That night I slept like I hadn't in years. Not deeply, but peacefully. The kind of sleep that doesn't erase the past but finally stops racing to outrun it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Lydia. She was crying. I hadn't heard her cry since her mother passed. She said, "He's dead." The words landed with no weight at all. I didn't understand them. Ezra, he's dead. Someone stabbed him in a prison fight. It wasn't targeted, they said, just chaos. Wrong place, wrong time? I didn't know what to say. I'm sorry, felt wrong. Good, felt wronger. Are you okay? She asked. I wasn't sure. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel grief. I felt still, like the water had gone quiet and I wasn't sure if it was safe or just deceptive. That night, I walked down to the beach. The sky was overcast, the moon trying to cut through clouds it had no power over. I sat on the sand, let the waves push and pull without permission, and whispered to the wind, "You don't win." Not to him, to the story, to the part of me that once thought his presence gave my life color. He was gone. The man who had orchestrated so many performances, whose entire existence was a revolving door of masks, was now permanently removed from the stage. But the aftermath? That was still mine to carry. Over the next few weeks, the world treated his death like a footnote, a brief article. No investigations, no headlines. He didn't matter anymore. His victims mattered more. For the first time, our stories outlived his shadow, and yet the finality of it left me unmoored. I had spent years defining myself in contrast to him, what I overcame, what I escaped, who I became despite him. But now that he was gone, I faced a new question: who am I without my survival story? It scared me. The blank space, the silence where his echo used to live. That's when I said yes to Claire's offer. The retreat was in Oregon this time. Misty mornings. Forests that smelled of moss and pine. 30 women, 30 stories. All different, all the same. Some were fresh from betrayal. Some were years out but still limping emotionally. And I stood in front of them not as a writer or speaker, but as proof. Not polished, not perfect, but real. I talked about the moment I found the documents. The moment I kissed him goodnight knowing I'd exposed his lies. The moment I faced him across that cold prison table. And the moment I walked away. Afterward, a woman named Mara pulled me aside. Her story was different. Her Conman was her father. For years he'd lived a double life. A second family, a second identity. He died before she ever confronted him. She said, "Everyone tells me I should be over it, that it wasn't about me." But it was. It was always about what I believed to be true. I hugged her. We didn't speak again that night. We didn't need to. Grief doesn't always require sound. I stayed up late journaling, as I often did. Only this time something strange happened. My hand moved slower. My words didn't fight to get out. I stared at the page and realized I wasn't writing about pain anymore. I was writing beyond it. I returned home different. Not changed in some big, cinematic way, but lighter. I let people in again. I started dating, not seriously, just with curiosity. I laughed more easily, trusted myself again. I could spot manipulation faster now, sure. But more importantly, I knew how to trust my gut when something felt real. And then came Rowan. We met at a local book signing. He wasn't flashy. He was quiet, observant, with an artist's smirk and a carpenter's hands. He asked thoughtful questions during the Q&A, and then lingered after to ask one more. How do you forgive someone who doesn't ask for it? I remember the pause that followed. The air between us heavy but not suffocating. I said, "You don't forgive them. You forgive the part of yourself that believed them." He nodded, smiled, said, "I've been trying to do that for years." We got coffee the next day, then again, then a walk, then dinner. No games, no performance, just ease. That's what startled me most, the ease. He didn't try to dazzle me. He didn't study me to impress. He just showed up, consistently, Genuinely. When I told him about Ezra, he didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He said, "You didn't deserve it, but you also didn't let it define you. That matters more than anything else." I didn't fall in love overnight. I grew into it. Slowly. Carefully. With all the caution of a woman who once loved a ghost. But Rowan never tried to replace anything. He just walked beside me, never ahead, never behind. Just with. One morning, I woke to find a note on my bedside table. "Don't forget to eat today. The world needs you upright." Silly. Sweet. Nothing poetic, but I smiled wider than I had in months. Because that's what love looked like now. Not grand gestures. Not whispered promises under the moon. But notes. Tea made before I asked. Silence held with intention. And most of all, space. Space to still be me. We've been together over a year now. We don't talk about marriage. We don't need to. We talk about books. About old movies. About what kind of trees we'd plant if we owned land. There's no pressure to become anything for each other. Just permission to be. Sometimes I still wake up from dreams with Ezra's face. Not nightmares. Just flashes. A memory disguised as a reminder. I don't fight them anymore. I acknowledge them, then let them go. Because that chapter is closed. And I'm still writing the rest. Not as a woman who was lied to, or betrayed, or broken. But as a woman who chose to keep loving the world. Even after it tried to shatter her. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most rebellious thing I've ever done. I used to think closure came in grand endings. A final conversation, a confession, a death. Something with clean lines, a bow tied around it, the kind of conclusion that lets you say, "This is over." But I've learned since then that real closure is quieter. Sometimes it doesn't even look like closure at all. Sometimes it looks like you washing dishes while humming a song you don't remember learning. Or laughing mid-sentence when your partner mispronounces a word. Or waking up and realizing you didn't think of him at all that day. That's how it happens. Not with a slam, but with a soft click you barely hear. The anniversary of Ezra's death passed with barely a whisper. I didn't visit his grave. I didn't light a candle. I didn't cry. What I did was spend the day walking along the shore, letting my feet sink into the wet sand, watching the sea erase every step behind me. The tide never asks what was there before. It just moves forward. That's how I tried to live now, like the tide. Rowan and I had carved out something honest. Not perfect, but deeply ours. We didn't keep secrets. We didn't pretend not to be shaped by our pasts. If he needed space, he asked. If I had a hard day, I told him. There were moments when fear tried to sneak in. Tiny fears, irrational ones. If he took too long to text back. If he went quiet mid-conversation. But I'd breathe, remind myself that love is not a crime scene. It's not a puzzle to solve. It's a home you build, slowly, with trust layered like bricks and honesty as mortar. We'd been living together for a few months when the envelope arrived. No return address. No postage. Just placed carefully in our mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. And all it said was, "You were never the only one watching him." I read it 3 times. The handwriting didn't match Ezra's. It wasn't familiar. I didn't panic. Not right away. I just stood in the kitchen, holding that note like it might catch fire, and let the silence crawl over me. Rowan came in, asked what was wrong. I handed him the note. He read it, blinked slowly, then asked, "Do you think it's real?" "I don't know," I whispered. But someone knew where we lived. That night, neither of us slept. We checked locks, reset the security system. I called Claire. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "It's probably nothing. But just in case you should dig." So I did. I went back through old emails, old forums, places where Ezra had once used aliases. I pulled up every name I remembered, every IP address the police had shared with me. I wasn't trying to be paranoid. I just knew one thing. Ezra had lived many lives. And maybe, just maybe, he hadn't done it alone. The second letter arrived 2 days later. Same envelope. Same hand. It said he told you what you needed. But he told me the truth. There was no signature. I took it to the local police. They said it wasn't threatening. They couldn't do much. Just an obsessed reader? Maybe, one officer said. People get weird about true crime stuff. But this didn't feel like a fan. It felt like a warning. And I couldn't stop thinking about that word. Truth. What truth? I dug deeper. I reached out to Lydia again, asked her if anyone had contacted her. She said no. But after a pause, she said, "There was one guy, years ago, said he was a friend of Ezra's. Asked me questions about what I knew. I thought he was a reporter, bah." "What was his name?" I asked. She couldn't remember. "It sounded fake," she said. "Something French, like Dubois. I searched every alias Ezra had used. Dubois wasn't one of them. But I remembered a story Ezra once told me. Back in the beginning, when he was still Daniel. He said he'd lived in Lyon once. That a man named Dubois had taken him in, taught him how to blend in. At the time, I thought he meant that figuratively. But now I wasn't so sure. The third letter came 3 days later. It was longer. Typed. No signature. It said, "You think he chose you for love. He didn't. He chose you because you were clean. Because you didn't ask questions. Because he needed a place to hide. You were the blank canvas. I was the one he painted on. I was the one who taught him the con. You just got caught in the end of the story. But don't mistake that for being the center. You were just a quiet chapter. He loved me. He told me so. And I watched him die knowing he was still looking for you." I dropped the letter. Rowan caught me as my knees buckled. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't a fan. This was personal. I called Claire again. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Come stay with me for a few days," she said. "Let me make some calls." While Rowan packed a bag, I sat at the kitchen table, rereading the letter, not to find a name, but a tone. Whoever wrote it, they weren't warning me. They were jealous, possessive, like I had stolen something they believed was theirs. Maybe Ezra had told them things. Maybe he had played us both. But if so, why contact me now? Why surface after all this time? Unless they hadn't known he was dead. Unless they blamed me. Claire connected us with a retired profiler, a woman who'd worked on financial crime rings, cult escapees, and long-game manipulators. She read the letters and said, "This is someone grieving, yes, but not over him, over control. They're mourning the loss of being the one who knew him best." "So what do I do?" I asked. Her answer chilled me. Right back. I didn't want to. I didn't want to play their game. But she explained, "You don't need to answer their questions. You need to break their narrative. Right now. They're the victim of your story in their mind. You need to remind them they were never in it." So I wrote one line. "I'm not a character in your memory. I'm the author of mine." We left the note in the mailbox under the same rock where their letters had appeared. 2 days passed. No reply. 4. Nothing. Then a final envelope arrived. Empty, except for a torn photo. It was the picture Ezra and I had taken on that first night in the airport. The one I'd deleted from my phone. The one I thought was gone forever. This one was burnt along the edges, my face still intact, his singed black. No note, just the silence. I never heard from them again. We changed addresses, got a P.O. box, moved further up the coast. Rowan built us a new mailbox from driftwood, a symbol of how even broken things can still hold purpose. Sometimes, late at night, I still wonder who they were, what role they played in Ezra's story, if they ever told him the truth, if he ever loved them, if he ever loved anyone. But then I remind myself, that doesn't matter. What matters is that I survived, that I built something whole out of the shrapnel, that I never let him, or anyone else, define my narrative. My second book came out 6 months later. It wasn't about Ezra. It was about her. The woman who woke up one day and realized the love she thought was her anchor was actually the weight holding her underwater. It was called The House We Burned to Escape. And in the final chapter, I wrote sometimes the plot twist isn't that he lied. It's that you stopped waiting for him to tell the truth, and you finally started telling your own. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.